The Jackson Five, singing about their roots in Northwest Indiana. The region, as those who grew up and lived there call it. Tom Dakich grew up there in Gary, just like the Jacksons. It's home. It's where his heart is. Tom Dakich is a lot like the conductor of the South Shore train, full speed ahead, a key driver for putting the region on track for economic growth. He's my guest this week on the Business and Beyond podcast. Hello and welcome to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. I'm Gary Dick.
This is the Dan Dakich Show on 93.5 and 107.5. The Fan.
Jimmy and I were just talking. All right. Look, it was the right move, I guess. Russell Wilson said it was.
You are probably familiar with that name, Dakich. That's Dan, the radio talk show host and former IU basketball star. But you may not realize Dan's older brother, Tom, is a main cog in the wheel of pushing what's next for the Northwest Indiana economy. For the Dakich brothers, moving things forward on their home turf is personal. Tom and Dan grew up in Lake County, graduated from Andrean, a small Catholic high school in Maryville. Tom had thoughts of becoming a priest, but wound up graduating from Wabash College and then earning a degree from the IU School of Law. Tom has dealt with deals on almost every continent on earth. Now he's focused on fostering growth where he grew up, in the region. And it is my pleasure to welcome Tom Dakich to the podcast. Tom, thanks for joining us. Now, your office is here in Central Indiana, Indianapolis, Carmel, but you're on the move. Where are you at now? You in Chicago?
Right now, I'm actually in Chicago at my daughter's condo, but getting ready to go to Prague for a couple of days. Kind of excited about that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of excited or exciting developments in Northwest Indiana, for so many years, and I've been covering business news in the state for a long time, and so many people have talked about the enormous potential for Northwest Indiana and just ready to be unleashed and right there in the shadow of Chicago. And it seems like, to me, those things are beginning to happen in part because of some of the developments you're involved with. What's really driving that right now?
I always like to tell people in Northwest Indiana that Indianapolis isn't the enemy. And then people, when walking around in Indianapolis or being in the legislature or whatever, I'd like to think I speak region, because it's a different language. There's differences in the way that you do that we do things between the two. So being able to speak region and translate region into Indianapolis, I think has been helpful in what I do. Yeah. The Indianapolis and the governor, Governor Holcomb, Lieutenant Governor Crouch, and got with Bill Hanna and created this double tracking. And
on the South Shore rail line, right?
Yeah. Exactly. So it used to be just, I don't want to be negative, but the South Shore used to be kind of a miserable commute. And if Mike Nolan, the head of the Nick D, wants to get cranky with me for saying that, that's fine. But it was not a fun commute. It was slow, and there was too many variables. But now, because of double tracking and because of Westlake, which is another extension, it's quicker to get from Gary downtown Chicago than it is to get from Naperville to downtown Chicago. And pretty soon it'll be better from Michigan City down to downtown Chicago. So this renaissance that's going on, I mean, that's a really big, important part.
Yeah, and as you look at that, those decreased commute times to downtown Chicago, I know a lot of folks in the region are really using that as a selling point to, hey, come live over here, come live in Indiana. And communities in Northwest Indiana, multiple, are making quality of life, quality of place improvements in their downtowns and those kinds of things.
Tom McDermott over in Hammond has worked really closely with two guys from Purdue Northwest, Chancellor Tom Keon and his Vice Chancellor, Matt Wells, to make that statement possible. It's viable to live in Hammond right now, to be a professional and to live in Hammond. And before, you couldn't really do that. And I'm not being strange about that, but it wasn't that it was unsafe. It just wasn't desirable. Now there's restaurants and entrepreneurs are popping up. My favorite rib joint. I always buy local. I don't go to chains at all. Zero. But my favorite restaurant in the area is a rib joint that's owned by somebody who flew in from Austin to Hammond to go open up a rib joint in Hammond.
Really? Hey, we want to get into that, but get in more of your early days in a bit. But you grew up there. You grew up in the region. Been an attorney for 40 years. In the last decade or so, you've really been focused on projects in the region. And I know there's a business case for what you do, to be sure, that you're pursuing, but it's also a bit personal, right?
It is intensely personal. So I have a brother and a sister. My sister was a prosecutor in Bloomington. She retired, which is weird to say, but she retired and she lives in Dune Acres in Chesterton, which is just this fabulous place right on the lake. My brother lives in Indianapolis and he's kind of a personality. But all
Dan.
three of us, Dan. But all three of us feel a real kinship toward it. Our father was a high school principal and a high school teacher at Calumet High School, which is not the most socioeconomically developed area. My mother was a third grade teacher. Our uncle was a lawyer and a judge there. My other uncle worked for the Indiana Department. I mean, we got all these ties here, generations of friends. Not just our friends, but our parents' friends. And they're all, and they kind of are all started, to be honest, looking down on me for years because they're like, okay, well, we stayed here and we're part of what's going on here. We made a living here and we raised our family here, but you moved to Indianapolis, kind of shame on you. Mm-hmm. And my point is well, okay, well, I'm still live in Indiana. I personally have lived in 9 different counties in Indiana. So I can't really be indicted too heavily for that. But at the end of the day, it became okay, well, let's really look at what we're doing here. I tried to build a data center in downtown Chicago. We crashed and burned. It wasn't any fun. And then Tom McDermott and a guy named Matt Reardon, who's a longtime friend, generations of friends, said, you got to come to Hammond and take a look here. And Anne Hathaway and Bill Hanna and Heather Ennis and all these great, large names made it possible for me to kind of live out a dream, which is to make a difference in an area that I love.
Talk about the data center, because that's a big investment and what that's all about, and why you think, beyond the personal piece, why it makes there's a great business case for it.
We have to stop in Indiana, specifically Northwest Indiana. We have to stop thinking that we're okay with getting the scraps off the table of Chicago. I mean, we don't need to live off the scraps. We can go right at there. We can go at one of their core businesses, and that's what we did with the data center. And that's what we're doing with the quantum corridor. Those two, creating a tech environment in Northwest Indiana really makes it's viable. It makes sense. I'll mention Matt Wells again from Purdue Northwest. He had a vision. He's kind of an energetic guy to the point of almost being a pest. He's so driving on getting stuff done. Heather Ennis, who I know is a friend of the show, but the head of the Northwest Indiana Forum, when she puts her mind to something, she drives it and makes it happen. There's a woman up here that runs the SBA 504 program named Erica Dombey, who is brilliant. I mean, brilliant, insightful, but maybe they didn't understand exactly how to move around Indianapolis as well. I'm not saying I'm great at it, but I kind of was able to fill a little piece for them. And they had all these brilliant ideas about creating a tech corridor. When I came in with Matt Reardon and Anne Hathaway, and when we kind of filled this gap a little bit, they already had done all the hard work.
Mm-hmm. We'll talk about that, the quantum corridor, what the vision is there, and what you see there, not just today, but going forward, what that can become. So
quantum computing, I always laugh because people think quantum computing is something that's real and all that. It's not real yet. It doesn't exist. It's like the I don't know. It's a myth. It's an idea, but there's billions and billions of dollars being invested by companies to create quantum computing. Well, they need to communicate. So Mark Lopez from then Congressman Vislavsky's office, now Congressman Mervan's office, really opened up our eyes by talking about the fact that there's a whole embedded fiber infrastructure that we don't even know about. It's all defense-based, and it runs throughout Chicago. So a group of us came up with this idea of let's extend that into Indiana and let's make it available for universities. So what it is, the Quantum Corridor is a term that we created. It will be what's called a cogent network. It'll be the fastest, most secure fiber network that exists today. It'll start in downtown Chicago at 350 East Cermak, which is the digital hub of the United States, and it'll run all the way out to PNW's campus out in Westville. That's roughly 39 miles. The state of Indiana is putting up, through the READY grant, putting up $4.5 million or something. We're putting up the other 2.5, and it's going to go along the toll road, and we're going to make it such that big research companies can come and put facilities right there and have instantaneous access in the most secure way to research hubs at University of Chicago and all these other Fermi Labs and all these other places, and that we're going to interconnect into them.
That's ambitious. And I've heard others, talk about that potential and what it could mean in particular for Indiana. And it sounds like it's off the charts. Again,
I keep talking about Governor Holcomb, but he just took ownership of this. Whenever I'm kind of being a name dropper, but whenever I see him, he's always like, "Hey, how's the fiber network going? Are we doing it?" Lieutenant Governor Crouch, we explain it to her. Ernie, her broadband guy. I mean, whenever we go in and explain it to people, they get it because it's a simple concept. Bring better transport of fiber to Northwest Indiana, and I think pretty optimistic. And our initial returns are good, but I think people are going to come and they're going to build some buildings here, and they're going to bring some scientists along with them.
Yeah. So the tech piece is one aspect, one piece of the investment and the focus that you have in Northwest Indiana. Another, and we recently had you on the show to talk about it, is a big multi-use, mixed-use development in Michigan City, $240 million investment that you think can translate into a lot more. Talk about that investment and why you're making it.
Again, I'm a cheerleader for Indiana. I'm a cheerleader for the things that we're doing here. There's a pair of men. One of his name is Scott Goodman at a company called Decennial Group, and then another one is Barry Shane, who is a really good developer, and they came up with the idea of using, of building something in Michigan City. What I try to do is make the lake, in these sorts of things, use the lake better, make it more accessible. One of the things about Central Indiana always kind of amazes me is that, but it's a strange thing, is that people in Central Indiana truly don't understand how remarkable Lake Michigan is. So people in Chicago get that because they're looking out the door and there's Lake Michigan. So trying to get these people's vision and being a co-developer with them, being involved in the group is great. It's wonderful. But also getting it to the point that everybody throughout the state understands that there's so much growth going on in Michigan City, not just with, okay, well, we're going to build another, Hardee's or whatever, I don't know, whatever. Mm-hmm. But these are real jobs with real people. There's going to be 300 people, full-time jobs coming to Michigan City to work at this place. And that's a lot of jobs.
Yeah. What do you think? So your development, then the other developments, again, back to the whole double tracking project, and which sparked this. How much more development? We see all kinds of projections on, very optimistic, but it seems like there's momentum, and these are things that are tangible things that can happen.
So yesterday I had a meeting up here, and I went to the desk, and there was a woman behind the desk, and I had to wait a few minutes, and I said, I asked her where she lived. She said, well, I live in Tinley Park, which is in Illinois. And I said, oh, okay. She said, where are you from? I said, well, I'm from Northwest Indiana. She's like, oh my God, I just moved from Whiting to Tinley Park and I hate it. Yeah. My taxes went up, my traffic went up. I don't feel safe. I don't have the camaraderie I did there. My husband and I just moved in January, and I think we're going to move back. I said, I need to get your name because I need to put your story out there, because that's exactly the kind of thing that the people running the state would like to hear.
Yeah. And because I hear it from others, mayors and others, folks from the region, Dr. Bill Hanna, you mentioned him earlier, but that those kinds of things are happening, that people over there in Illinois are tired of the, taxes and the hassles and those kinds of things. They're seeing the improvements and what's happening in Northwest Indiana, and they're saying, hey, we're crossing the state line.
So a buddy of mine, Andy Quinnell, did a little, he lives in Munster, and he did a little survey. He had a survey of about 20 people who moved from Illinois to Indiana. And because there's a lot, I had a house in Munster. We sold to somebody from Illinois, a doctor with 7 kids. And he's involved politically. And his point was, he asked these people, every time you hear somebody who moved from Illinois to Indiana, what did you vote when you were in Illinois? And they're like, well, I was a Democrat. And I said, how are you voting when you're in Indiana? He said, I'm a Republican. And it's just, and I'm not being, I guess I'm being political. I'm not trying to be that way, but it's like, okay, so those people changed their way of thinking to our way of thinking, because our way of thinking is just better. I mean, yesterday I talked to about 400 school kids, and you're talking to that many kids, you don't, they don't really listen that much, but you could tell my whole message to them was, you live in the best state in the Midwest. I mean, I don't want to live in Illinois. Your parents don't want to live in Illinois. I don't want to live in Kentucky. What's going on down there? Ohio. I'm not a fan of Ohio, and Michigan's all arrogant and snobby. So you live in the best place in the Midwest. Go to school and come back and be part of this renaissance. And it goes over 390 of the kids, but I think a half a dozen of them or so raise their hand and ask some questions.
Mm-hmm. What we're going to hit a break here in just a minute, but you talk about, changing that mindset in so many places around Indiana. That's part of the process, kind of changing the mindset and from what has always been. If you look at in Northwest Indiana, I think there's a perception of stuck in the past. Maybe I don't know, but the steel industry was so important and was a great living for so many families up there and fueled that. That's changed dramatically. Do you sense a change now in the attitude in terms of developments like yours, Quantum Corridor, these mixed use developments, the South Shore is actually having, that things are happening in the mindset of the region is changing a little bit?
What I'm going to tell you, this is a dead true story. A while ago, a statewide Indiana politician, I went to a fundraiser, statewide Indiana politician this is before my brother got famous or whatever, but basically looked, I see, so where are you from? I said, I'm from the region. I grew up in Gary and Maryville. And he looked at me dead straight in the eye and said, you've been sitting at this dinner for an hour and you've been participating. You've been completely normal. How is that possible? How did you get out of there? How did you escape the negativity and the poverty? And he was dead serious.
Wow. Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know. My parents were great. They were school teachers and they instilled something in us. So as recently as 10 years ago, that was, or whatever it was, that was a real thing. The region doesn't do itself any favors, like being defensive about the state of Indiana or being negative about it. And that's another part of when I talk. My point is you guys have to try. I mean, you're smaller than the rest of the state. You've got to go out of your way to be, to do more things. Go to Jasper. If you're going to go to Jasper, call me. Tell me you're going to go to Jasper. I'll set you up with a politician down there who you can talk to. And I mean, I don't care, but just try to get to know the rest of the state. And fortunately, a bunch of legislators in Indiana, the Speaker of the House has been great. Todd's been wonderful. They're trying too, and double tracking is the personification of that.
Much more ahead with Tom Dakich when we return, including growing up in Northwest Indiana, those early years, brother Dan, and what it was like to grow up with him, a character that we all enjoy being around. So that and much more when the Business and Beyond podcast returns.
This is Alex Brown. Get caught up on the state's top business news every business day with Inside Indiana Business Radio on demand. This twice daily podcast features our statewide Inside Indiana Business radio reports with additional bonus content that you can listen to anytime, anywhere. You can listen now on the podcast page at insideindianabusiness.com or subscribe for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. My guest this week, Attorney Tom Dakich, who is really making his mark in a big way in Northwest Indiana with some major developments, technology-wise, mixed-use developments, a lot of major investment, really being part of a renaissance of sorts taking place in Northwest Indiana. And Tom, as we talked about in the first part of the podcast here, your investment in the region is personal because you grew up there. Talk about those early years and growing up in Northwest Indiana.
So my brother and I'm a couple years older than he is, and we were kind of raised together. We all went to Catholic school. My parents were like both public school teachers, and my dad was principal, and they caught a lot of grief for sending us to Catholic school, to Andrean or St. Peter and Paul before that. But that was a big part of our identity. Both my brother and I. My sister is younger than us, but and she's a lawyer, and she was Phi Beta Kappa in college, so she's a lot smarter than the other two than her brothers. But so a big part of my brother and my identity was being from the region. And then I went to Wabash, and we had growing up we had a riot. I always ask my friends from high school and all that, did you ever feel pressure? Did you ever, like, the things about that you read about in terms of all the crime and all that sort of stuff? We never had any of that. If you want to annoy somebody from Indianapolis, I always tell them, hey, listen, I've been a crime victim 19 times in my life. All 19 were in central Indiana. Not one has been in Northwest Indiana.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the way that my brother and I, that's kind of how we identify. I think we both identify as being kids from the region who had a really nice childhood. And
just in hearing you talk, and I've heard Dan talk as well, the influence of your parents, both educators, the influence of your parents. I mean, everyone's influenced by their parents, but I think there's a really strong influence and strong connection there. And being educators and a principal, you probably didn't get away with too much.
My father's perspective is, guys, I've seen it from other people. You can't come a con man. Yeah. I've learned from, like, you guys were 12 years old. I was teaching kids who are high schoolers and teenagers. I got you. And he was always a half a step ahead of us. My mother tried to instill culture. She took us one time to Dan and I to the Nutcracker Suite when we weren't quite mature enough to appreciate it, and that didn't go over well. She still holds it over our heads. That is absolutely true.
That's good. Hey, so how about you? So Dan, we'll talk about Dan in a minute. Of course, went on to IU and played basketball. And were you an athlete? Did you play sports?
I was never any good. Dan, I didn't have the focus for it. Dan came out and was, Dan was the kid who could, like, we played golf. We played golf all summer long. We played golf and baseball. And Dan was great, not good, great at baseball. When we were young kids. He always had a need to play. He was always wanting to play. When I was playing bitty basketball at age 10, he was only 8. You had to be 10 to play, and my dad had to lie to get him on the thing, get him on the team, that sort of thing. He was Dan. Dan would pick up a racquetball racket, not having played racquetball, and win the local tournament. Dan was always great. I take a little bit of credit for it because when I was, I was never any good, but he would always got to play with us. I mean, when he was an 8th grader, he was playing with us when we were sophomores, and I think he was really comfortable. But when Dan was at IU, and he was a player, this is probably a bad story to tell, but
no,
when Dan was at IU, it's just us, nobody else.
That's right.
We went to the Cubs game, and we ran out of money. We were buying beers, and we ran out of money. So there were some IU fans there, and he had a pair of shoes, and they were like, hey, yeah, and he had a pair of game worn shoes. So we end up selling his game worn shoes enough to get us some more beers in order for the game.
That's good. Hey, you got to do what you got to do, you know?
Right, exactly. Fortunately, we weren't driving because we could take the South Shore and the Red Line all the way there because we were, but so we needed to sell his shoes in order to get more beer.
Oh, that's outstanding. So Andrean, right? You were an 59ers, right?
Exactly.
And then college. So Wabash, did you, Dan, of course, IU guy, not sure where your sister went, but why Wabash?
So Adam Benjamin was a longtime congressman here. I was not a great student in high school. I wasn't bad, but I just wasn't that focused. I wanted to go to Notre Dame, but they wouldn't accept me. And so I was either going to go to Loyola in downtown Chicago. I liked faith-based education. I at one point I thought about being a priest, and I liked faith-based education. And Loyola, went to go visit Loyola I liked it. I liked Loyola in Chicago, and my father could see in me that I would get lost, in an urban environment like that. I needed to have a little bit more of a structure around me. So I went down to visit Wabash, and there was a guy there named Ray Kleitch who went to Calumet. He's the wrong side of the tracks guy. He's Bob Grant's. He was Bob Grant. I think he was best man at Bob Grant's wedding.
Okay.
And Ray is brilliant. And Ray talked to me when I went down there. And then Adam Benjamin, who is a little bit a friend, his brother was a dentist there, believe it or not. And it kind of something for me clicked. Wabash, the whole thing was about what Wabash does really well is it takes care of its own. I try to hire Wabash guys. I've gotten a lot of benefit from being a Wabash guy. Brian Burdick, I mentioned Grant. I mean, all these, we kind of try to take care of each other. And I got in there and it just clicked.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it just really worked. I know you have a pretty substantial connection to DePaul.
Yeah, right.
But your son having gone there and being a quarterback.
Yeah.
But Wabash was important to me. It refined the work that my parents did to make me the person, whatever, for better or worse, that I am.
Yeah. And I look, Indiana is fortunate to have such great public and private institutions. And you look at Wabash and DePaul and the people they churn out on an annual basis. And over the years, it's pretty amazing. And each school, as you say, they do a good job, I think, of taking care of their own, and they got a great network.
There's a camaraderie there that we share, that Wabash and DePaul shares. Like I've met your son a couple of times, and every time I say to him something like, "Oh yeah, okay, I'll talk slow. You can't really understand it." Right. And we have fun. It's kind of a big fraternity, honestly.
Yeah, yeah. So when you got out of Wabash, what was the path? Because you have worked over the years internationally a lot, done a lot of international. Talk about that path.
So I always knew I wanted to be I wrote a paper. Andrean was good for me too, because the nuns there, a woman named Sister Justin, had us write a paper of who your heroes are, and people at that time were saying, I don't remember who the quarterback was for Bears. And my hero, what I wrote about was my heroes were people that were doing international deals. I mean, my whole thing is we live in a really small corner of the world, but you need to go out. So urban professionals. Now, I always wanted to be a professional. And my friend Dan Dumage says that although we grew up really close to each other, I'm not a true region guy because my father took a shower before going to work. His father, who worked in the build, had to take a shower after going to work. So he's like, yeah, you're not really a region guy. But I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer. And so I wanted to go to Vanderbilt, to be honest. And I got into Vanderbilt for law school, but Dan started playing at IU, and I knew that would be really fun. So, and I haven't looked back for a moment since going to Indiana for law school. Then I clerked for a big firm in Chicago, wanted to go up there, and I met a guy named Milt Thompson, who I know is a friend of the show.
Yep.
Milt, I would not be anywhere in Indianapolis other than Milt. Milt, basically, I met him at a college, at a fair thing. I was going to work for a firm in Chicago, done deal. And Milt said, hey, I want you to meet this guy. I want you to come. He's the prosecutor of Marion County. His name is Steve Goldsmith. I was like, whatever. I'm a Bears fan. So I meet Milt, gets me up there, and I meet Steve. And Steve offers me a job in the Marion County Prosecutor's Office. And I was like, well, I can make a bunch of money working for this big firm here. And so Steve, who was great to me, basically cut a deal with this firm and said, look, I'm going to take Tom for a year. And after that, he can go back to your firm. And said, okay, it was kind of a radical thing at the time. Mm-hmm. And I never went back. I grew to like Indianapolis. But I built a whole life here in a relationship. Married a girl whose father was the name partner at Kleinman Rose Wolf and Wallach, Roberta Kleinman, and never looked back. But I've always wanted to do international deals. And so my whole practice since before 9/11 in the late 90s was being a general counsel to companies that do telecommunications deals around the world.
So, Tom, what's next? I mean, you've got a lot of irons in the fire, in particular, as we've talked about in Northwest Indiana. What do you see as you look at the region the next 5-10 years and beyond? A lot of changes in the offing. I mean, do you see that? I mean, the double track and the Westlake, those projects will be coming to life. The projects you're talking about and others that will happen stand to maybe radically change things in Northwest Indiana. So
I want to finish off the Quantum Corridor, the work at the hotel in Michigan City and all that. That's going to go well. What I want to try to figure out is how to get broadband to Gary. And I don't know how to do that, but I think there's so many companies that are working on that. It doesn't need my help, but we do have a big pipe running through Gary on the toll road. So that's kind of there, but I don't really think, I could be wrong about this, but I think Gary needs beyond broadband because people are going to help on the AT&T, Comcast, these really important companies are going to do it. But there's got to be a way to infuse more energy into Gary. Gary has a great mayor. Jerome Prince is a great mayor. Eddie Melton is a serious legislator. The people of Gary are eager for something good to happen. And I don't know if I fit in that. I think I kind of may be able to, from a technology perspective, supporting them. But I think that would be the next thing that I'd like to try to do.
We will be following it to be sure. Tom Dakich, thanks for taking the time to be on the podcast. And thanks for all you're doing for Northwest Indiana, because there are many things going on and you're behind a lot of them. And we'll continue to follow. So good luck going forward.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
All right. Likewise. And thank you for joining us on this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. It is a weekly conversation with achievers in business, sports, entertainment, and beyond. And you can download all of our episodes and get Indiana business news 24/7. All you have to do is go to InsideIndianaBusiness.com. I'm Gary Dick. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.